Cool. Well, I'm Esteban Fajardo. I'm 26. I'm a game designer based in Los Angeles. I graduated from USC's Interactive Media and Games program in 2016, and while there, that was my claim to fame came from working on the indie stealth brawler Chambara, which won a BAFTA Ones to Watch award in 2015. And since then, I've been working in different spots in the industry, doing game design at Skydance Interactive, where I worked on a arena shooter and a VR game. And currently, I'm at Evening Star, which is a fairly new studio founded by some of the creators of Sonic Mania. And I've done a lot of consulting for game design on the side too, and I've also taught a lot of kids how to make games. And that's an important thing to me because I was still am a second generation game developer. My father has been making games my entire life on a small artsy scale, but that means that I've been very, very lucky and privileged to have the resources to making games for my entire life, and so education stuff is important to push forward to me.
So I don't know how absurd a question this is, but I think this often gets glossed over, and when you've reached a certain point like you have, or certainly where I have, where making time on a Saturday to talk about video games with a total stranger seems like a good use of both of our time. Something that might get glossed over is just a very basic question like this, which is, why do you like video games?
I like video games because it's play, and play is this deeply primal force it's older than humans. Animals play, and there's a definition of play that I love that defines work as any activity whose value is extrinsic to the activity itself, whereas play is an activity whose value is intrinsic. You play for the sake of playing. And you need to work. There's a lot of things that you need to get from working, but play is it's life itself in that way. You do it for its own sake. It's a reason for living and existing. You're in the moment, and so I'm lucky to have been raised in an environment where that was always valued and it was always treasured. And so wanting to foster that and give that to people and create it has just been a no-brainer in my entire life.
So, in your life so far, what do you think is the hardest lesson you've learned because of or through video games? And it's kind of, as I think you'll learn, a lot of my questions intentionally open-ended. So, you could definitely interpret that, through the course of, interacting with others or just through developing them. Usually what I'm curious is, what's the first thing that jumps to head when I ask you, jumps to mind rather when, that's two different things. We can certainly talk about also about what else jumped to head. I'm just sort of interested in what's your, instinctual response to a question like that? Is there a lesson that comes to mind, or is that not really the way you think about your relationship with games?
Let's see. I'm not sure I can pin down an exact single answer on the hardest lesson just off the top of my head, but making games is extremely difficult, and I'm not sure anyone really knows how to do it.
Yeah, I think you said in our emails, we'll get to it later, that I think so. Just no one really even knows how to talk about them or what they are. And we'll get, the more we talk, hopefully that's the goal. The less we'll understand about what we're actually discussing here. That to me always feels like a successful conversation. But seriously, it does, because I think that's a healthy attitude, and it's where we'll maybe find new growth and inroads is from a mindset or a headset, I guess, if you will, since my brain seems to be mixing with it, from those two of do we really understand all this? To sort of resist that urge of oh, well, we've got everything codified and we should, and that's a good impulse too, but it's healthy, I think, to be pushing in that other direction too, for sure. So yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, so games are mysterious. They're unknowable in a lot of ways. And compared to other media forms, which I think are very codified in their form, games can be pretty amorphous. I took a lot of animation classes while I was in school, and I was always stunned by the difference in curriculum between teaching animation versus teaching games. And that's not to spell out any difference in quality between like instructors or anything. It's just animation is a form that has been around a long enough time that I could step into a class and understand how that class was designed to fit into a broader curriculum and be like, oh, people have been doing this for so long that they know how to build the steps to get people to reach the specializations that form an industry that is understood how to reach like an endpoint that's defined. Not to say that there aren't problems there. There's like massive labor problems in like an animation industry.
So by not to cut you off, I mean by endpoint, because like, and I understand that there's been some specific to USC, there have been some changes as far as like who's running the games program there, what the goals are, and how that sort of chain reactions down into how, you know, pedagogy and like what classes or how classes are being taught towards what end goal. So like by endpoint, do you mean like, is that like quote unquote getting a job in industry, or what is the endpoint that you're referring to?
So the endpoint that I'm referring to is even more general than that.
Just to have a degree?
Oh, no. I mean, even more general than that.
Oh, wow. Just to go to rooms?
And a lot of people see higher education as a prerequisite to a job, and like the goal for that higher education is to be able to have stability in a job. And I can definitely like do some speaking towards that, but I mean just in terms of like being in control of a craft in order to produce a media product that that is deliberate and meaningful for its audience. That as a goal, as a general goal that creators have, whatever they are producing, whether it's music, literature, journalism, a table making, toasters, like you want to understand the process well enough to really control how it exists in people's lives, and that's especially important in games because games require the participation of their audience in order to function.
Right.
It's easy for a game to completely break down functionally if that relationship goes awry.
So, and I guess maybe it's a little different if you're second generation, but like even, and I will go more general on my end too. So why did knowing that like you like games, like not everyone who likes games necessarily wants to go make them or work with them or work on them, but you know, obviously you grew up with it and things were a little different. So I mean, was that, obviously I'm guessing that's the thing that came up, you know, talking with your dad, but I mean, in what ways was this the thing that like he encouraged you to? Was this the thing where like you felt like a sort of pressure to follow in the footsteps, or like why did you take that knowledge of, hey, I like this thing and I'm going to get a degree in it, and then I'm going to, even from there, because even from there there's like a fork in the road, like you chose to still go down the path. So, you know, why did knowing you liked games lead to you wanting to continue to take it to the point where you have today?
Well, games are fun, and they lighten up people's lives quite a bit. But the specific stuff that really brought me into wanting to make games, and that informed a lot of my like approach and philosophies around games, was that when I was very young, my father designed a game where you play as a little toddler version of me, and it was made right after my brother had been born. He's crawling around this virtual house, a recreation of the house we were living in at the time, and it's just a little like tag chasing game that you just move this little pixel toddler around to try and chase this crawling baby. And it doesn't mean anything to anyone outside of our little, our family household, but it means a lot to me within that context. It was so specifically designed to capture an intimate moment that was important between us that playing it again allows me to relive a time that I don't have any memory of, and see a house that we grew up in that I only know through pictures, but I can experience it now in a game as well. And the idea that games could be personally affecting in like such a powerful way that allowed just that informs my entire like approach to games, why they're important, the ways that they can be useful to people and meaningful.
Well, what's something? When would you say roughly this journey started? I mean, is it the intention of being a game designer? Because I guess I'm curious, like, what's something from when you first started through to today, like, what are you still working to achieve?
It's tough to pinpoint a beginning to this journey, just because I don't know a moment where I wasn't quite on it. I've been dedicated to working professionally as a game designer in some capacity for pretty much my entire life, and finding the forms to design fun activities for people, whether that's through digital means or not, with whatever tools I have available to me. And the goal is to really just be able to do this professionally, to be able to make a living doing what I love doing. And I love the process of making games. It can be frustrating because making games is extremely difficult and there's lots of hardships along the way there. But being able to day to day do the activity that I enjoy doing, which is putting together experiences that are fun and interesting and interactive. That's the goal, and being able to stay in that goal, that's the long-term mission.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned, and I don't know if it's common knowledge, but I definitely have heard and understand that, like, making games is harder than most people realize, or maybe even many people who are starting to make them realize. Like, what do you find is a common misperception, or like either? Well, I guess like one question is like, well, who do you think who has like the hardest job you think in the games ecosystem? Maybe that would be a place to start with that.
Well, that's an interesting question.
Not that it needs to be like a hierarchy, but
yeah, as a starting point, the hardest job in the games industry. Goodness. Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start breaking that down. I might not be able to follow that line of questioning, actually, the more I think about it. Goodness.
That's okay.
That is a tough question. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure I have
oh, that's okay. There. You could certainly pass on any of these. It would be a short conversation if you pass on all of them. Well, so then what is the difficulty then that you're speaking to here? Because you've mentioned that already a few times, that like it's harder than maybe people realize. So like, what's the nature of the difficulty that you're speaking to here?
So let's see. So when I think about game creation, or any media creation, I think it can be split down between, or when people talk about games, there's the dream of the game, and then there's the execution of the dream. So a dream is the fantasy that is sort of being like sold to the player. the reason why you want to play it, the feeling you want to have when you're playing it. It doesn't always have to be a positive feeling. It could be a sad game. It could be something that's trying to change your opinion on something or give you an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have. But there is always like an intentional dream for an ideal player that that is designed and pitched and stuff. And then there's execution itself. It's the way that the developers try to achieve accomplishing that dream. And there can always be breakdowns sort of in either. There's difficulties, I think, in pitching a dream. There has to be like a clear conception of the dream by whoever's like in charge of that in a game process, and that can vary depending on the studio. That has to be calcified and clarified, and that can be difficult because it either needs to be done by a small group of people or a large group of people. And the more people invested in it, the more everyone has to be able to be on the same page. You have to get everyone to agree and be invested in that dream and seeing it come to reality. That dream then has to be pitched around. It has to be sold to stakeholders who may be able to give the resources to realize it. They have to buy in on that. It has to be pitched to marketers who can then find a way to pass along that dream to audiences and stuff. And then it comes to the execution of that, and there's a million disagreements that can happen on the way there, and because something is amorphous and systems-based often in games, there can be a lot of different ways to try and accomplish it. I'm trying to think of some good specific examples to...
Oh, that's okay. Take your time.
Yeah, and this is tough because I can't speak a lot of the specific workings of the stuff that I've been doing. Dang it, stuff keeps not getting released, and I can't talk about things under NDA.
Oh, NDA. Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Well,
I want to speak about like specific stuff, and I can speak about my experience working on Chambara. I can speak about my experience working on Pwned, which was a arena shooter with Skydance Interactive. That was very much a dead-on arrival arena shooter, oh goodness, what was the name of that Overwatch competitor that, was it Cliff Bleszinski did? Goodness, I might need to Google what his name was. I don't know, there's a lot of examples.
Lawbreakers, I think.
Lawbreakers,
is that what it was?
Yeah.
It already feels like a century ago. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of games that, if they depend on a multiplayer market, they require to have like a living audience to keep up with it, and even after years of development, they can vanish instantly if they don't have that. But I came onto that project after it had been in development for like 8 years, and I was only there for like the last year. But interesting stuff there. I don't know. What do we want out of this conversation?
Have I lost you?
Yeah.
Nothing specific. I think it's just looking for a conversation and to see where it goes. But I guess day of, it's always, I may be asking about stuff that you either can't talk about or you don't really have an opinion about, or I don't really want you to feel like you're on the spot. But there's no particular focus or quote unquote thing I'm looking to get from you.
Okay, so let me... So here's something interesting that might be a direction, and let me know
Sure.
if it is or not.
Sure.
Because one of the things that I like to think about a lot is the how do I even put this? So like within laboring games, the reason I brought up dreams versus execution earlier is because often the dream of the game is the thing that gets the most coverage, I think, by journalists, and the most discussion around a game is often explaining what its fantasy is, and not a lot actually is discussed around the execution of specific things. And a lot of that is because games are deeply technical. The knowledge for doing them is just really hard to grasp. It's hard to understand what like a technical artist does, or a lot of the myriad different roles within a game's development. And as someone who is often working in the trenches on a game, I can sometimes look with jealousy to I look at like anime production a lot, and there's a term called sakuga, which is the just single shots of animation that are often like praiseworthy, but also more specifically they're able to be identified and linked to the specific laborers who created the keyframes of those specific parts of animation. And that's like a really interesting area of journalism that exists within that subculture, is that like the specific cast of creators are like really given a lot of individual detail, and you can trace the careers of people working from show to show, and understand the value of a lot of like the individual people who are working on them with those flourishes. And that, I think, arises because there's a very consistent form that animation, and anime in specific, takes. Shows can look similar to each other, often very deliberately, so that people can work together, learn the same skills, and their work can be not interchangeable, but they can be in collaboration with each other in a way that looks very seamless, and it's easy to dig in deeper rather than wide. And games, on the other hand, are extremely wide in terms of their form. A soccer game is so totally different from a shooter, is so totally different than poker, is so totally different than a racing game, that often creators of games, because the industry can be volatile, are bounced around between different genres and types of projects. But it often feels like you don't know how to make the game you're making until the very end, because each game is its own genre. It feels like the forms and rules of each of them are totally different from one another, and the study it takes to understand how one works often aren't completely interchangeable. The expertise you need to know to make a platformer is very different than the expertise you need to know to make a visual novel. They're completely different skill sets, but we lump everything under the exact same forms of games, and I think that that's valuable. It's great that like we have an umbrella that is extremely diverse, and can encompass the most kinds of different forms within one community, and there probably hasn't been as much kinds of play as there are now since computers, since the advent of computers, and video games really became their own thing apart from games, when we had sports and card games and stuff. There's so many different kinds of play, but because it's such a wide field, each of them I think is not deeply understood.
I mean, I would totally agree with you, but it's still like I feel like it's a rarely articulated thing. Like, I've certainly thought about it in terms of like just how atomized the labor on, especially big games, but definitely smaller games too. And I think maybe sometimes the problem is like we think about it in terms of like how much money was put into it, which is still not thinking about like the actual people who are doing all this stuff. But like you say, people rarely discuss execution. And I guess like, so what are the umbrellas that you see people like, because I think people think that this stuff is being discussed, and like the word that comes to mind for me is how often I hear the word mechanics in a game. Like I even hear people who don't really follow games that closely, somehow even they, and they're not picking it up from me, they pick up that word mechanics. And then so it's like, so like let's just start with that term. Like is that if we were going to put this up as like a, you know, if we're putting up a new sheet of paper, the top left column is dream, right column is execution. Does the word mechanics even enter on either side of that, or is that just totally
a form of execution, probably?
Yeah.
However, I think mechanics is an interesting word because I'm actually not sure there's a complete agreement over what mechanics means.
No, I don't think so either.
No, yeah, there's a wonderful book I've got, sadly out of print, although I wish I could give it to everyone. It's just called 20 Questions About Video Games. And they start with the most basic of questions, such as, what is a game mechanic? And it interviews a number of developers that each give completely different answers. Like, it's very illuminating, because none of them are wrong, and they're often compatible with each other, and they work. But mechanics it means something different, really based on the genre. It's such a wide word, but generally, mechanics are the it's the interlocking of rule systems, right? It's the behaviors that emerge from, well, I guess in a typical MDA definition that would be dynamics, but the mechanics are the rules themselves, and from those rules behaviors emerge, and by changing the mechanics you can hopefully change the behaviors to align with what you believe will either be the most pleasurable or interesting experience from a game. But are rules something written down on a piece of paper? Are they the code themselves, which is essentially a very prescriptive, very defined set of rules? Like, if I set a variable in code and say, like, x equals 0, that is technically a rule. But then, yeah, does that mean we count all of the code as the mechanics? Where on earth does a line get drawn? Who's responsible for the mechanics?
Well, I think, too, a conversation about x equals 0 may be abstracted further away too from that definitely doesn't, you know, I guess that's definitely execution language, but that definitely does not sound like dream language.
No, but it is how you get to the dream. So let's say let's say the dream or pitch of a game is you want to feel like the greatest soccer player who ever lived. That this is the pitch we're giving. It's not going to be like your other sports games where you're playing as real stars and figures. We want you, the person playing this game, to feel like you have become a superstar. That's the dream. Someone can hear that, and there's a million ways you could think about what that actually means in terms of its definite execution. Does that mean we're going to have a character creator and you're defining the look of this person? Does this mean we're going to have a lot of narrative beats? Is it going to have RPG elements where we've got stats increasing to show the zero to hero moment? Like, there's so many different ways that you can take the basic one-sentence pitch for a game, the thing that gets people excited or not excited, and then figure out how that's defined and stuff. And that's like an extremely tricky process because people can be invested in the dream and disappointed in the execution, but people can also miscommunicate or like not align on the dream. I think about like the Mass Effect 3 ending where the developers had like clearly their own intentions on like what the dream was, but it didn't align with what their audience's dream was. And that was like a huge backlash because it had nothing to do with execution at that point. It had nothing to do with what's put in, but the intentions were different there. Or No Man's Sky, where I think that had a very clear mission statement, but it wasn't communicated. It wasn't something that the players, and even if the attempts were made to communicate it, the players formed their own dream for that game so instantly when it was first unveiled, and it never aligned with the game's dream was. And some people were able to see the game on its terms and really enjoy it for what it was, but a huge number of people didn't want what the game wanted. And so many years of development have gone into realigning what the game's dream was to match what the player's dream was.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot. I mean, even, I don't, my memory is that was not a crowdsourced game, No Man's Sky, but certainly after all that, it was reshaped in the mold of as though it were. I don't really know that there's a question there, but I think it's interesting to tie these types of recurring backlashes at the intersection of dream and execution, which is, I guess, like at the center of both of those is like where someone's disappointed or their feelings are hurt somehow. And so it sounds like, are we not necessarily officially putting forth or proposing or positing, but it sounds like, are we saying like, well, would maybe these types of backlashes or would certain types of things that get discussed around games, would they maybe not get as heated if we had a better vocabulary to, I mean, you had said people rarely discuss execution, but I'm sure what you said so far, like those are problems from the dream column.
Yes. So I think I know what you're asking, and I do want to get towards this. I think the reason this emerges, and the reason I'm focusing on dreams right now is because.
And not the game dreams or nights into dreams. Let's be clear.
Yeah, there's probably a better word.
No, but it's an interesting construct.
I like the word.
I'm loving it. Yeah, I'm with you.
It doesn't exist yet, right? It's just a feeling. It doesn't have the specifics. But the more something I find often reading game reviews and talking with people who have just launched games, are sometimes there's a shared disappointment that so many game reviews of the stuff that they've worked on are so focused on explaining what the game itself is that I've talked to people who've been very disappointed. It's just like, yeah, I worked on this thing for years, and all they're doing is explaining what it is, and not judging the quality of the specific things that were done to realize the thingness that it has. And I think that's because the more general a publication is, the more has to be spent explaining the dream of that game. So an outlet like Polygon doesn't need to say what a battle royale is. You can just say battle royale, and the audience, they can assume, will understand it. But the New York Times will have to explain what that genre is. And that phenomenon indicates to me that part of our issue is that because games are so broad, so much time and effort needs to be spent to defining genres. We have very broad genres. We've got action adventure, and I don't even know what that means anymore because the games within it can be so different. And that means to me that we need better categories to define the genres and that encompass the dreams that these games exist under. They're each trying to fulfill different things. They're trying to reach the specific kinds of markets that people are looking for, but there isn't a strong enough ecosystem to support these individual niches, which I think each need to become complete ecosystems. I think I'm close with a lot of people who work at Yacht Club Games, and they make very particular style of like platformers, and I
Right.
think they're the best in the world at what they do. But people who aren't in line with that kind of like the goal that they have in terms of how they're making a game won't connect and respond to it, and I think see it on its own terms. And so that means that like the people who might be writing about their games might not be the right audience in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think often it's weird. I think often it sounds like a stale or like a cold or even like a sterile question of like, well, who is the audience? But the more I am around this stuff, the more you come back to that question. And I think that I don't really know. Oftentimes it can feel like to me, and ostensibly I guess that's my side of the aisle as a writer, even though I don't really write for those types of websites or publications, it often feels like they're either, and I'm not saying any specific one, but it often feels like they're either writing for just themselves or they're writing for other people who want to write for them. But maybe I'm out of touch, which is totally possible, or maybe I'm just not reading the right stuff and I have a bad sense of it.
That's like a totally good feeling to have, though, because I don't think it's uncommon. I think like there's a lot of
and you can totally disagree with me. That's fine. It's just like I run into this all the yeah.
I don't disagree with you because I
came here for a fight. Okay.
I do want pushback on anything I say, but
good.
I'm jumping in so forcefully because I do think that feeling isn't uncommon. I think it's very general that a lot of people are struggling to find what they're looking for. And that, like, we all know it's out there. I know that there are games that, like, I would love and writing about games that I would love, but it's hard to find that exact thing. There's a number of writers and critics that I adore who I don't look to for, like, consumer recommendations. They're not going to write about games that I'm going to have the same experience they'll have with it. I'll find the writing very valuable because it expands my understanding of why someone might enjoy something. I'd love to read about games that I have no interest in playing. But when I'm looking for what's going to connect me to what I'm looking for, it's harder to find. It's harder to find that media soulmate, you know?
I hear you. I mean, it makes sense because what you're talking about, and I think the comparison to animation, and certainly, we can get more granular, although that is a huge ecosystem in and of itself with anime production. You were saying there was that aspect of fandom, of coverage, of literacy, where people can look at a single shot of animation and be able to sort of tweeze apart and recognize the distinct disciplines. And so that's the total opposite of what we just agreed on. That's like the opposite of a consolidation of like, here's how you think about the thing. It's, wow, there's, there probably are still umbrellas, but they protect you from more rain, if you will. And I don't really think that, like, this comes up all the time. I mean, I'm sure it comes up with, not just between you and me here organically, but it comes up with, like, tons of people I know in all different walks of life in this stuff, in all different pockets of the world around this stuff. And I'm sure it comes up with you and, different conversations you've had. And I'm sure even at, even maybe with your dad as well. I don't know if this is ever a thing you talk about with him, like how palpable a thing is it of this sort of narrowing. I mean, one could argue, and I guess I am the one arguing or putting forth that, like, things like the Mass Effect 3 thing, or where there are these, maybe it's not that insightful to say, but like things like those types of frictions indicate, like, stop broadening this stuff. Like, we want to keep it narrower. But I don't know, and that's been discussed ad hoc and is kind of a known thing. How do we broaden the dream? who broadens it? Because I often feel like in the conversations I have, the expectation is like, well, what we're doing is fine. It's the other groups that need to change, which I think is just human nature. But I think it's more everyone doing their part and it not being like a is acrimonious the right word? It's just it not being like a combative thing.
Yeah.
Now I have to look up acrimonious. I feel like it must be the right word. Yes, it is. Yes. Okay. All right. I wanted to make sure I wanted to use a smart word, but make sure I let you know I was dumb enough to not quite know what it meant. But I don't think it needs to be an acrimonious thing. But I mean, and I'm not asking you like, hey, let's sit down and solve this, but certainly pointing the finger at somebody else. Yeah, go ahead.
So and I don't mean to be singling out any industries or people like towards these things as I'm searching for like specific examples, because I think it's a general like phenomenon that emerges as systems become more complicated, and like the internet has allowed like social systems to become deeply complicated just because of their breadth. And I think that the solution isn't to make dreams that are broader or more accessible to more people, but instead to find ways to invest in ways for for smaller communities to be able to survive and to be able to exist as niches. And the reason I can connect to this to the story of like what got me into games and that deeply personal, like interpersonal connection that games were a part of, is that like that experience isn't going to be meaningful to anyone outside of the audience that it was made for. It is as it is like as fine an example of like the complete opposite thing that's possible. The dream of that game only connects with an audience of one or two people, really, but it's able to do so deeply. And I think that the changes that would allow for the hands of the people making the games to be more recognized, for the execution of games to be more understood, is for smaller communities to be able to exist and thrive independent or in concert with each other. But if every game tries to be for everyone and pitches itself as for everyone, then we're going to continue to make a mess on the game development side, I think.
Right. Well, then it's kind of really for no one. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out if you may be the first, second generation game developer I've spoken with, which in many years and a couple hundred of these interviews is like, oh, that's unusual.
There's going to be more and more of us.
Oh, for sure.
It's going to be a very strange.
I mean, how do you? Well, okay. I mean, like, so what is happening now around games? Like, I would be curious. Like, maybe you don't talk to him about this stuff, and I honestly don't know if he's still around. So hopefully, I want to make sure I'm using that. I want to make sure I'm using the correct verb tenses here and not be assuming anything. But like, what does he seem most impressed by? Like, by what's happening now around games, and like, are there things happening now in games you never imagined yourself happening when you started, or when he first started? Because I think it's easy to be like, oh, very doom and gloom, and understandable about like these types of, I guess problem would be the word for what we're discussing, or it's a growing pain, or it's something else. But definitely, like, you can look at where all the problems are, and that tells you one thing, but you can also take stock of like where there's inroads being made, and that's part of the story too. I mean, my dad is also in media. He was a newspaper man. He is still around as well. And we rarely talk about media stuff because I think it's like we understand where the problems are, and like everyone understands where the problems are. But with game stuff, it may be a little different. So, but I don't want to be assuming that like you're talking all the time with them about like this and that in video games. But it's definitely a thing that like presents itself as a potential topic here.
Yeah, this is something that I had mentioned in the initial email. So I'm sorry if this sounds like repeating something to you, but I think the problem that atomization has created is that it's hard for individuals to make a living in games. But I think that this problem comes about because of a very good positive change, which is that the tools of producing games have become significantly more accessible than they were 10 or 15 years ago. It's easier for someone to get into the industry because it requires less effort to produce a finished game, and that's great. That is really, really, really good. It opens up opportunities to so many more marginalized people, where previously to have the resources and knowledge of the tools in order to create something, you had to be within a very privileged class in order to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And the opening up of this industry to more people, I think, like create a real revolution in terms of the kinds of experiences that people were able to have thanks to games, and we're still benefiting from that. But at the same time, while it's easier for someone to make games now than it was 15 years ago, it is much harder for anyone to make a living making games than it was even 5 years ago, because the other edge of that sword is that as more games are able to be produced, it's harder for them to find an audience. It's harder for the people looking for these specific dreams in this miasma of different dreams that are being produced. It's harder for these products, these creations, to meet their audiences. It's harder for people to sort through all of this noise that's created. All of it, I think, deeply meaningful. I'm not saying that there's a lot of bad games and good games are being lost in it. I think it's that people aren't connecting to aren't able to find the games that they would most connect to. And I think that is the crux of the problem. But it's a problem that's created by a really good positive thing, which is that more people are able to be creating games. And I don't think the solution is gatekeepers. The solution is finding the ways to develop the niches who are able to, through better language and understanding of games, able to understand what they are looking for and what they want, and to be able to be in a community that can connect them directly to the people producing what it is that they need in their lives.
So I don't want to sound pessimistic or down, but I mean, obviously, these are no small challenges, and a lot of people give up, or they can't do it as often as they want, or they have to walk away, or life happens, which is something we've all been experiencing. Well, we all experience it anyway. But I think that it's much more in the air and much more understandable nowadays. But so I'm not suggesting anything, but like you had even already mentioned like a couple of frustrations, or just like frustrating situations. Not that you personally were frustrated, but so I mean, if and when you daydream about quitting games, like what is the job or day job that you imagine yourself doing? Or do you never daydream about that?
I have never been able to find an answer, because as hard as this industry can be, the act of figuring out what systems and mechanics are going to make people think in what way and what fun can result from that. The act of figuring out how to code something, the act of I don't know, learning how to do some art in order to put together a game. I find that process just pleasurable and exciting to do. If I had to do a job, it would be to support being able, like if I had to do a different job, it would be to support being able to do that. And anyone may find themselves in that situation, and so I don't expect that will never happen to me. But what I advocate to my friends and peers who I think struggle under the weight of creating something that can cut through this difficult, uncurated, like mess, is that like to figure out what the audience they want to connect with is, and not even just in terms of like a consumer level, but like when I need fulfillment from the games that I'm making. I listed like the companies that I've worked at, but what gives me fulfillment is small personal games that I will make for an audience of 1 or 2 friends that don't make money, that aren't for the world. They're for a specific person, and that's where I can get the reaction and spiritual fulfillment of making games that I think anyone who is in games for the love of it is really looking for. They're looking for being able to affect someone's life, and they don't need to affect everyone's life. They just need to figure out who they want to touch with their work.
Yeah.
And do that. And the benefit of doing that is that it's significantly easier than trying to make something for everyone. You don't need to worry about localizing or a huge broad range of accessibility. Things that are important and good for games that need to be or are trying to be for everyone. And there should be games that do try to be for everyone in these large games and products. But like, I don't need to explain to my friend that the jump button is spacebar, because I can trust that my friend will intuitively know what to do it, and that makes developing a small experience easy and possible to do on my free time outside of work. And I think games can be hobbyist as well as professional, and that's a method towards deepening the experience of games.
Well, I don't know if this is even like a true blanket statement, but I mean, these types of conversations pop up around writers all the time too, and the things you're saying you advocate to others sound very similar to the things I advocate to others, which is about defining goals. And I think maybe something else we're saying here is like, if you're intending to be a lifer with it, you need to be doing it for yourself on some level. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's true, but I don't know, because I think when like you look out, and like I think that like that's where some of this dream versus execution stuff can be kind of cloudy, is like if you look at that Mass Effect 3 thing, for example, which is just a shorthand for like I don't know, revising what the original intentions or what the original output was. I think that like it often can feel like, and it depends where you look, but it often feels like some people are not making games. It's all for somebody else, which is fine, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of element of like, their own personal fingerprints or their own personal intentions. And I guess this sort of like telegraphs a little bit into what you were talking about, where like there's different reasons why the disciplines don't seem distinct or can't be discerned. It's a lot of alliteration there, but it also is like, it's not always a constant thing that people are necessarily putting out there as well. But it again depends where you look and what and how you look, but I think that that's definitely an element as well.
Yeah.
There's no question mark on the end of that, but
we're just chatting.
Yeah.
I think that I agree that to want to do something for your entire life, I think you do need to believe in it and want to do it on a deep level. But I think that the reason so many people burn out of the industry, in addition to, of course, like tough labor conditions.
Yeah.
Is that I think a lot of people who come into it with a great deal of love don't feel that love fulfilled, and I think that trying to live in this amorphous industry where it's hard to know if what you're making is going to be able to connect with anyone, but also the groups that you're making things with can often shift on a dime, as things are so, again, volatile and amorphous, and people are treated very interchangeably sometimes in many industries. That I think is the thing that destroys the love of this particular act of creation. And so that's why I think finding ways to have the fulfillment from that creation on a deeper, smaller level that's narrow and focused rather than like broad and potentially shallow is what can help sustain people to carry through.
Well, how does or does at all does nostalgia block progress or some sort of traction in the work you're trying to do or in the work you're someday aspiring to do in the future? And that could be nostalgia for the past of an audience, an industry, and I was going to say in publishers, but that's also part of industry. It could also be things outside of games for sure as well, because none of this stuff is in a vacuum.
Yeah, I wonder. Nostalgia. I wonder if this is my reaction here is similar to anyone else who is has any second generation connections within making games. But nostalgia is a very weird word to me because in the games industry, it's often referring to games of past or other sorts of stuff. But I don't feel like I connect as much with the ideas of nostalgia that the industry currently still holds on to.
Where does it seem placed onto? Because I'm a little bit older than you, but you probably can see much more clearly. You say yeah.
No. It's not that I can. I don't think that's it.
Well,
by age, you might have more to be nostalgic for.
Exactly.
I don't know if our differences in age is enough to create that. But I think the thing is like, oh goodness, how do I vocalize this? It's like because games have always been an accepted form in my life. They've always been treated as something that is worthwhile and valuable. I've never felt like they need to prove anything, but also I don't feel like there's a difference between the past and now so much, if that makes any sense. But again, like that could just be from a huge lack of experience. I don't know yet how the industry will change in the future, and that will definitely change my opinion of how it is currently or was a few years ago.
Yeah.
But,
well, so I was just asking, like, well, where does that value seem to be placed? Although if you're saying that you don't really have that distinction yourself, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's not a roadblock at all, but maybe it is for people who are older than you.
Yeah. I could see. Yeah. I think it, especially with the conflicts that I have set up in terms of what I see as issues within the industry. I think it is, possible to look with rose-tinted glasses at the time when the industry was smaller and the audience was smaller, and it was easier to connect with an audience that you knew would expect certain things, and you know how to deliver towards those things. Just because the nature of a smaller industry means that might have been easier to do. But of course, like as with all nostalgia, that covers up the fact that many people weren't allowed into that.
Right.
Like the reason it's a larger industry and a larger audience is because so much work has been done to grow it, to make it what it is now. And we just have to figure out what to do with it. And receding into the past isn't gonna solve that. Gatekeepers aren't gonna solve that. Building new systems to accommodate a growing field, that's what's gonna address and solve these things.
Well, what's something major or systemic or just on, like, I don't know, like just something major that you would have thought by 2021 from those beginnings, like you thought would have been different? And you keep calling it I keep calling it the ecosystem, you keep calling it the mess that is video games. So like, what's something that you thought, oh, certainly, by now, this would not still have been a thing that was, an issue earlier on? Basically, I guess the question is like, what surprises you that is still pretty regressive, or that like is pretty ostrich? I guess I asked it in a nicer way.
Yeah. I'm always surprised that there's still such a large subset of people that you only ever see, on my end at least, anonymously online being like, oh man, lazy devs, like why don't they just do this?
Yeah.
That's the thing that shocks me is still around, but again, that's because of my experiences of understanding the tools and the industry for so long that I'm always shocked how little other people understand about well, you can't just press the button and make the thing happen. There's a lot of steps to figure out to do this thing.
Well, the shorthand that I always latch onto for that is when you read in reviews. And I was definitely guilty of this. I was probably closer to your age now. I'm trying to remember if that would even sync up. But just things in reviews where you would see where people would say well, would is a real missed opportunity that they didn't do blah blah blah. And it's well, actually, how do you know they didn't consider that? How do you know that it would actually be any better, the thing that you're imagining? It still seems like it's often, yeah, I agree with you, and I did when you were saying it, but as I'm saying it out loud and from where I sit, it's not just been it's not just been your experience. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it has to do with people's internal filters, or maybe things need to be edited more thoroughly, or maybe it's just I guess it's advantageous sometimes to write from a position of fueling the engine of some sort of conflict. But I mean, you were saying and that conflict could be, a developer lashes out or responds or scoffs or responds in some way, something that drives, more engagement, more clicks onto a review or something than it might otherwise. But you were saying earlier, and I think this was you quoting someone else, paraphrasing, and I'll paraphrase from your paraphrase, but it was something about oh, well, all they're doing is explaining what it is. They're not judging the specific qualities of the thingness that it has, I think is the way you put it. Yeah, it's a bummer, man, to put it inelegantly, because it feels as advanced or however forward-thinking a lot of the types of criticism out there seems to think it is, there is still that element of, and I know best, and I know better, and therefore, see me after class is sort of the tone of the review. But that just might be me and my hang-ups with just the nature of criticism in general, or criticism online, or the realities of both of those on a deadline, where the goal is to kind of be fastest gun in the West and get it posted first. So there are some there are some considerations that are just not time for, but
so something that I thought was I can't remember when this happened, but I found it very interesting when there was a semi-viral discovery that a lot of people learned what frustum culling was when a Horizon Zero Dawn developer had explained either through video or GIF or something that, like, yeah, when the camera moves, it hides the world outside of the camera's view.
Oh, yes, exactly. This sort of thing. Yes.
Yeah, and so that created a very strange fire between like development communities and fan and journalist communities, where the developers were like, every game does this. This is like been common practice for 30 years almost. And it's the least
like
remarkable
Horizon,
thing.
it was like with Horizon,
Yeah, it was Horizon
Zero Dawn. Yeah.
But that's like, I saw that take off, and I wasn't sure what to, and I'm still not sure like what to do with it, because it was the technique akin to just like, in my mind, it's as simple as like editing in film, where it's such a basic part of the trade that I think developers expect our audiences to understand that level of stuff. But why would they? There's no reason anyone should. And absolutely, it should be celebrated when people get to see a little bit of the magic behind the curtain of how something comes together. But I thought that disconnect there and the emotions people had when that magic trick was revealed were very fascinating to me, and I don't know if I want that to happen more often or less.
Well, I'm just quickly Googling it. I mean, so that was 2017, which I thought it was more recent, but it feels forever ago.
Wait, I put 3 years ago. It's 4 years ago now. We're in 2021.
Yeah, in my mind, I thought it was 5 years ago. So the point is, it was a lot. It feels very firmly in the rear view. But we are living in the era where every unit of time you could think of is about a year. It doesn't matter if it's a day or an hour or a week. It feels like it's been a year. I literally said this on a call to someone yesterday, and that feels like a year ago when I said that. And it has barely been over 24 hours. But like just a quick. Internet search of it, I'm seeing things in headlines, which is just pulling from all sorts of different websites and, Reddit and YouTube. So this is not coming from any particular website, but I'm just saying things like calling it like a quote-unquote secret technical trick or clever tricks, why frustum culling matters and why it's not important. Don't mock people for being amazed by it. Right. I mean, some of this too, like, I think there needs to be some introspection on, like, because of how secretive is too strong of a word, but there's definitely been a don't look behind the curtain attitude towards game development where, like, well, yeah, of course that's going to be, but I mean, I think it's like, I don't know if it's just like that particular thing, but like, I feel like I've never seen a thing that's like, hey, did you know when you're in an elevator in a game that it's loading stuff that's ahead? Like, I don't know, my memory of this, I may be mischaracterizing it, but it was like, boy, this is kind of clever and kind of sneaky, rather than like, hey, this is just like a standard thing, because like, what did you expect, that like under the hood the game is remembering everything all the time when literally you're never seeing what's behind you anyway? So I don't know. I mean, maybe. Like, if it was going to happen again, like, because I think there was definitely an element of it where it was like, was there that element of it? Let me ask you. I think your memory may be better than mine of it. Of like, this is kind of sneaky, or was it like, wow, that's really clever, or was it a mix of everything? Because I think like,
it was a mix of everything.
Because I think like maybe each time a thing like this happens, it would be good if it was like, oh, those lazy devs, like you were saying, because that is still a perception that's still, despite however technologically impressive and ambitious games are, there's still this attitude of like people making it don't know what they're doing, and they're cutting corners everywhere they possibly can. And then, of course, there was like a big game release recently that just continues to fuel this sort of thing. So a while back I did ask you a question, which was like, if we're going to see more repetitions of this, which seems inevitable, I guess like how can we track, like, well, are we getting smarter? Are we getting to a less combative place? Because I think that would probably be like a good goal to have, instead of like, here's another example of them being lazy. You know, like it's sort of like a stereotyping about an entire profession, which is not even a profession, but it is, again, another example of these disciplines don't even seem distinct to the audience at large and writers and critics at large. It's just sort of, oh, it's just devs.
Yeah.
People aren't even sure who they're shaking their fist at.
Yeah, I think that developers, we've been like bad ambassadors, I think, of teaching a lot of general audiences what behind-the-scenes stuff looks like. And I wish in the future that like more devs would consider, I don't know, switching into journalism or criticism, or you know, sharing their expertise within these different avenues where they are able to bring the knowledge of how something was put together into the discussion, the more mainstream public discussion of those things. Because I think that there should be more deeper intermingling of these things, and I think that the people who do write and talk about games should be brought in more to see how these things are made. And I think that there's like a lot of great work that some people are doing to do these sorts of things. I love like the no-clip documentaries, which I think do a good job of embedding throughout the process of a game's creation to illuminate more like the facets of how something are made, and to demystify that process more. But I think that it's incumbent on developers as well to like to put in the actual work needed to show people, here's how it's done.
Well, I don't know how you're doing on time. I think we're coming up on the time that we had blocked out. I have at least one more big question for you, but was there, because obviously we jumped around quite a bit, was there something you wanted to get into or you wanted to mention before I ask you one more vexing question? Sorry to put you on the spot again there.
That's all good. I just want to make sure that I give that the thought needed to honor that question.
Sure, take your time. Usually it's the sort of thing you'll remember as soon as we part company.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think I'm going to honor the moment by saying, yeah, what's your last question?
Well, what do you feel video games have accomplished?
Video games have been the Cambrian evolution of play, or Cambrian explosion of play. They've like evolved the many ancient forms of playfulness that have existed, I don't know, since we were monkeys, into so many different kinds of expressive forms, and created experiences that never had existed before, and will continue to create experiences that haven't yet experienced, or that haven't yet existed. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's incredible. And I love video games.